Okay, good afternoon. Apologies for the late start. Previous meeting overran somewhat. Should we just go around the table quickly just to do introductions?
Tom Thorpe, PCC's Policy and Scrutiny Manager.
So, Phil Kane, Temporary Assistant Chief Constable, Local Policing.
Amanda Oliver, Assistant Chief Constable, Specialist Operations.
Maria Ells, Head of Organisation and Development.
John Grange, Inspector, North Yorkshire Police Rural Task Force.
Will Naylor, Deputy Police and Crime Commissioner.
Good afternoon, Fraser Sampson, Interim CEO.
Julian Mulligan, Police and Crime Commissioner. Okay, so we've got apologies from Chief Constable Jones, Deputy Chief Constable Lisa Winwood, Jane Wintermer and John McFall. So, on to the minutes of the previous meeting. Has anybody got any comments they want to raise on pages 1 or 2? Nope. Page 3. So we'll pick up on the 101 performance later on in the agenda. Okay.
Yeah, and just to say, there was one Twitter question we couldn't answer at the time that has been answered on our website now about the de-arrests at Kingfisher.
On the action log then, well, there's a fly tipping action.
Well, so 209 on the burglary presentation, that's going to come back outside of this meeting, but an update on some of the issues we discussed about burglary. 210, in fact, we were talking about this morning. Yes, there's a national fly tipping task force. So we were talking about it from a National Rural Crime Network perspective. Sarah Lee from the Countryside Alliance, who's one of our members, went to that meeting. She hasn't done the report back to us yet as to what was discussed. And I can't remember if someone from North Yorkshire Police went or not.
I can't remember who we've sent, but I know that from now on we've got... I can't remember who we've sent, recall who we've sent now, but I know that from going forward we're going to have a police officer presence representing us nationally at each of those meetings.
Okay, so there was a report done that sort of disappeared into the bowels of Parliament, hasn't there, that we've never seen, and I wonder whether or not we might perhaps link that through the new APPG on rural crime.
Yeah, and funnily enough, again, we were talking this morning, fly tipping isn't just a rural issue, but it is a significant rural one. So, yes, as we understand it, the relatively new all-party parliamentary group on rural policing is trying to get their hands on it. How they go about doing that, I don't know, but if they do, all the better for us.
Okay, so let's follow up with the chair of that group, because she was quite helpful when I met her, so let's do that.
As we've been doing the objectives for rural crime nationally, because we now hold a portfolio, one of the, I think there's about 5 objectives seem to be coming out really clearly, and one of them is fly tipping. So we'll have problem-solving groups represented across each of those. The others, I think, will be police-led. This one will probably link into the existing group, but will report back in through the portfolio that we're now holding. So we should get an element of direction from that as well.
So, Will, is it just worth, because we have had some engagement with local teams here on this issue, and we haven't got that far, have we?
Not as yet. I think, it's different everywhere. We heard there were some particular fly tipping issues in Selby, so I've linked in with some local people there, and they've linked in the councillors on my behalf, and they're trying to bring the police in. I don't think, it is a local authority-led issue, and it's just trying to get, I think, everyone in the room singing off the same hymn sheet rather than sort of passing the buck. But, so we will continue to try to make progress. And we thought if North Yorkshire tries to make a particular effort or tries to do something innovative on fly tipping, Selby might be the place to do it. So we're just exploring options really as much as anything. Are there any national things that we're learning from that meeting and others that we can try and start to implement in North Yorkshire?
I know I've spoken with the PCC in Dorset, and this is an issue that he's really concerned about as well. And I think they've got some local initiatives going on as well. So it might be worthwhile linking in with Dorset and some of the things they're trying there as well. 212, I think that was down to Phil, that was down to you.
Yeah, that's right, yeah. We've provided a written response
Yeah,
across.
Yeah.
that's complete on our website now.
Can I just ask on the, it'd be really helpful on the actions is to, so for example, 212, it's not clear what that is actually about in the way that it's written. Can we just make sure that the, that the actions are easy to decipher? Thank you. Okay, next one is modern slavery.
Yeah, so that's in train, Commissioner, and hopefully we'll be able to report back to you for the next meeting. But again, the Nexus team and some of Maria's audit team are looking at collating across from the HMIC report to what work's being undertaken in force. Okay, that's great. And then the other two we've dealt with.
Yeah.
Okay, fantastic.
Yeah, the 215, I'm not sure if it's in the slides for the update on could be Misperton, but I think there was an agreement at the time that the D arrests information would be included on the update monthly. I can't remember if it is or not, but we'll cross that bridge when we get there.
Okay. All right. So now we have had some questions from the public. So can we have those questions, please? So this one is from Mark Botham. Hello, Mark. Will, do you want to pick up this?
Yes, so as I understand it, given the move from the Newby Whisk building to Alton Court building, a number of sort of various artefacts and tables and all sorts of things, trophies, were assessed. Many of those have gone, I think, to the new building and are on display, and others were considered for auction. There was concern of how thorough that process was and where the sale was, which is due to be Scotland. The reason it was in Scotland is because there is a contract in place with an auctioneer who gets rid of police items that they might have received for all different reasons. They assess where you'd get best value for money for those lots, and that contractor decided Scotland was the best place. That's now no longer going ahead, and the process is being reviewed to make sure it's an appropriate place. Whether that be Scotland again, I have no idea, but we're making sure the contractors are aware of the sort of significance of some of those items, and albeit there was a thorough process, I understand it, to assess all of the items that were left. They're going to just double check all of those things to make sure there aren't retired officers or others who would be interested in maybe buying them or taking them or whatever the process might be.
Okay, thank you.
The auction, when it is held, will also be available online, so any interested individual will be able to make bids online.
Well said. So whilst it's physically in Scotland, anyone can take part in the auction.
Okay, all right, thank you. And then the next one, Amanda, I think is possibly for you.
Yeah, that's right, Commissioner. So we've got a range of measures that we put in place in order to enhance road safety across North Yorkshire and the City of York. That ranges from direct action, operational days with police officers, right the way through. And of course, right the way through that, we engage our communities. So you'll often see action linked to Rural Watch, protecting our rural areas, Country Watch, etc. One of the successful schemes that we have done is the Community Speed Watch, which empowers people to work with us to tackle speed and the perception of speed within their communities. As I say, it is only one of a range of methods that we use.
Will, do you want to just...
Yeah, so normally there are a number of reasons that the police will deploy enforcement. One of those is if there have been deaths or serious injury or on the roads, and there's a sort of relatively complex matrix that assigns a score to that, as well as to the speed, as well as to other risks. And the police will deploy if there are concerns about risk of death or injury, if there's a common motorcycle route and motorcyclists are a particular concern because of the ratio of deaths that are involved in motorcycle routes. And thirdly, if there is a evidence-based speeding problem. So all of these issues are evidence-based with stats and information that's available at sort of local authority and police level. and the police will look at all of that information together and then make the correct decision. That might be community speed watch if there is a perception of speeding, but actually the data might suggest that it's about sort of tolerance. So if it's 30 mile an hour zone and it's 31, the police wouldn't deploy to that because it's not breaking the 10% plus 2 speed limit that is guidance. So they might suggest a community speed watch instead.
And I think it's sufficient. Also, community speed watch is not an enforcement activity, it's an education activity, and I think it's important just to make that clear as well.
Yeah, so where there is evidence of speeding and it's appropriate and able that police to enforce it, so there's a site that they can use to deploy, the police will deploy.
Okay, thank you. Rural crime.
Yes, Commissioner, I brought Inspector John Grange with me today, who heads up our rural task force. I think I'd like to start by saying rural crime is such a wide topic that I'm sure that over the coming months we can try and define it a little bit more about exactly what we'd like to bring to this meeting. But I think it's fair to say that North Yorkshire Police has been on a journey that probably started in about early 2016, and that was as a result of the Rural Crime Network survey, where, if we're honest, we thought we were doing okay. We looked at the survey and realised that actually our rural communities are experiencing a greater fear of crime than what we would have expected, and certainly what we would tolerate. We put together a stakeholder-approved rural policing strategy, and we kicked off with a big event in Thirsk. And we realised immediately that we needed some dedicated resource to tackle rural crime. I'm pleased to report that we've actually, bearing in mind we are the largest rural county in England, we've actually got the largest rural task force in England and Wales now. So we're really pleased with that achievement. It's now 18 strong because we've increased the unit by an additional sergeant. We have a coordinator in place, and there's an awful lot of activity that takes place. We also applied for and were successful in being appointed as the Wildlife Crime and Rural Affairs National Portfolio Lead. That's headed up by the Chief Constable. We've just looked at nominating a Rural Affairs support and a Deputy Chief Constable from elsewhere, and I'm taking on the portfolio of the rural crime side of things. That actually means I'm managing the National Wildlife Crime Unit, which comes with some additional expertise that we can tap into. We've used our position over the last 2 years to start to influence rural and policing, both locally, regionally and nationally. So John now heads up the North East region rural... can you give me the correct title, John, so I don't get it wrong?
So I chair the North East Regional Enforcement Group for Wildlife Crime, which encompasses the 7 regions, 7 counties right up to the northern borders, so Northumbria, Cleveland, Durham, and then the Yath region, and also sit on the Regional Rural Crime Group as well, which incorporates the same region.
Thank you. Other forces are now looking to North Yorkshire Police as best practice, and we're carrying out a lot of work. In fact, the Chief and I have just spent the weekend at the National Wildlife Crime Conference down in Warwickshire. I might need some help with this because I can't see with my glasses on with... Am I doing something wrong?
That's it.
Okay, thank you. So some background then. HMIC inspection report on effectiveness in 2016 identified that 40% of crime is resolved over the telephone, and that was higher than the national average. But of course we were doing lots of things around that to look at more effective ways of deploying. What we actually realised when we did our own internal work was that there was a high proportion of that was in rural areas. So whilst the deployment might have been right for that particular crime, actually we were missing out on opportunities to engage with our rural communities. And to be honest, they felt isolated. They were ringing up to report crime and then we weren't deploying to them, and we felt that that wasn't encouraging people to come forward and have the trust and confidence in us that we would like. That was as a result of the Thrive process. We looked at, as well, at a high level of crimes finalised were without suspects, and the investigation rarely got beyond the minimum standards. The national...
Can I just ask a question, Amanda? Sorry. So just before we just leave Thrive, I just take an example of somebody who said something to me. She's a young mum, lived on an isolated farmhouse on the top of a moor in the middle of nowhere. got 3 small children, and she reported some men outside the farm, probably poaching with dogs, guns, called it into the force control room, and was thrived. And nobody was deployed. She felt, because she was in a very isolated location in the middle of nowhere with young children, that the response hadn't understood her vulnerabilities and her circumstances. So my question really is, are we now confident that when somebody in similar or those sort of circumstances calls into the FCR, they understand the context of those types of calls?
Okay, so to set some context first of all at a high level before I pass on to John, one of the 5 wildlife crime priorities that we've set right across the country is poaching. Another thing to note is that as a strategic firearms commander, I am more frequently than I would like asked to authorise firearms authorities because we've got concerns about people on land with guns and that they're illegally held.
So what happened in that circumstance was somebody called the local police. The local police said, oh, they've spoken to someone and it's all right, they've got permission. Well, she happened to be the wife of the landowner and she knew full well that they hadn't got permission. So it's that local link with local communities and sort of understanding that is so important.
It is. So what I was trying to do there is just to set that nationally poaching is a strategic issue for us and we're doing lots and lots of work around that. We've got a national priority group looking just at poaching with lots of partners and lots of various police forces involved. We've distilled that locally and John will now touch on just some of the approaches that we've been doing with poaching, such as the poaching packs.
So, sorry,
well, it's just on the same note, because that's kind of a force control room issue on a rural crime or incident. That was more about the assessment of vulnerability. I've certainly heard, and I think the office gets, I can't remember if it was just me or into the OPCC more widely, but steadily more, I would say, concerns about being understood. So it's not about the vulnerability, it's about do they understand what's being reported to them, be it poaching or anything else. I'm sure John and his team know it backwards, but is that same understanding to the same extent in the control room?
So just to touch on that, Commissioner, we have provided some guidance and training to the control room so they can understand vulnerability in the rural context a bit more, just like the example you've given, which quite rightly highlights that particular specific vulnerabilities felt by that one person. We have also rolled out some internal training, guidance and available documents to people so they understand poaching as a particular issue better. They're available in all operational police cars, so that issue can be dealt with better as those incidents come into the control room.
And so maybe, well, there might be an example of poaching, but others were just things like electric fences and gates and things like that being a really important part of how they manage livestock, but the control room might think it's just a sort of piece of equipment missing from a garage that doesn't quite, the impact isn't always understood quite so well. So there might be specific things like poaching which are really high on the agenda, but it's the really sort of bog standard kind of stuff, and whether that's truly understood and the terminology is understood and that kind of thing. It was really low-level things that just didn't feel like the person on the other end of the phone really understood what it meant to be sort of suffering that or have that happen.
I think the first thing is keep feeding that in, because there's always more work to do, and we're certainly not saying that we're perfect in every way. I think what we're trying to demonstrate is we're still on the journey, lots more to do, but we are on with it. And John, do you just want to touch on the coordinator role and that person's background and some of the things that lady's now doing?
Yes, we have Judith Skilbeck, who works on my team as a rural policing coordinator. She's quite key in ensuring that we touch with partners, touch base with them, and making sure that issues such as that from the community are fed back, providing context to other colleagues in the control room. Because I think that's primarily what that's about, is about appreciating context around that. So some of it as well is we provide feedback through our offices to those callers, once or twice, and making sure that they get across exactly the impact of that. So it's not just treated as a piece of equipment, actually what the context of that particular issue might be.
Sorry, I've got no doubt, having been out with the task force, having heard particular officers on the phone with individuals, the reassurance they can give, because they know the words and they can sort of totally portray that understanding, you can tell means a lot to the people on the other end of the phone, and it's just, the control room will only do it so far because they deal with such a range of things that they can never be trained on everything. I totally understand that. But the impact it has on people feeling understood, I think, will be really important to develop that as far as is possible in the control room. I
suppose also we've got new recruits coming into the control room as well, and whether there's a sort of an opportunity there to make sure that, you know, that, I mean, I don't know, do people still go out and about and visit different parts of North Yorkshire? Because they used to do that in the control room, didn't they?
To be honest, Commissioner, I'm not sure what the induction programme is, but I can make sure that John goes away, and it's a really good point about the new starters and just capturing those people as well, and we can make sure we do
maybe
that.
where they come from. I imagine most are relatively central York, but whether there's just advertising slightly further afield that's still commutable, you know, out of York, but might just make a difference, or asking Brian or something. Yeah,
and also sort of understanding what the common problems are in rural areas, so, you know, your quad bike thefts and, you know, the impact of those sort of things and that sort of stuff.
We'll make sure we capture that. And Judith herself worked in control room, didn't she, before she joined the
that's
team?
good.
That's the point.
That's good.
Okay. We developed the strategy, which we tabled in 2016, and we've been working towards that strategy since that time. So the next thing that I wanted to touch on was a little bit of the strategy, really. So we've got an approach to engagement. It isn't just all about enforcement within that team. We've attended over 15 shows over the summer months. We've had thousands and thousands of conversations at smaller local events, parish council meetings, drop-ins at auction marks, etc. We've got a wide range of channels that we're using to reach out to people. We've made good use of traditional media, so we've been on Crime Watch, Radio 4, local BBC channels, and then we've done lots of leaflets, had things in magazines such as NFU, local and national newspapers, and we've been making really good use of social media. So we've got Facebook, Twitter and Instagram as just 3 of the channels that we use in relation to that as well, just to try and reach out using as many different methods as possible. Prevention is a key aspect of what we do. We launched Operation Woolen, where we said that we would reach out to all of our farms and small holdings. We've had a 20% take-up rate so far, which is about 1,000 farms have been issued with the crime prevention packs, and that work's continuing on. As a result of this, it has increased the intelligence flow, which has meant that we're much more connected to the community and that we're much more aware of what some of the issues are.
Andy, have you got that evidence of increased intelligence flow? Because that would be really interesting to know if you can match that with sort of levels of understanding and confidence. That would be just really interesting to know if we can. We might not be able to if you look backwards without planning it, but to know how linked they are.
Yeah, I mean, I haven't got the numbers of increased intelligence flow. I don't know, John, whether you can try and summarise that in a bit more.
It'd be a difficult one to really get down on from a data point of view. I think what we're trying to get at there is only by having those conversations, just as you have yourself there, in terms of with the local community, you understand the issues that are happening, and that's what you gain through intelligence flow.
That's good. No, so it's more anecdotal. You are out about more in there, so it's not you've not seen a more. No, okay.
We've been just sorry, one other thing. I suppose it was the word intelligence that sort of flagged this to me, but I was having a conversation with the new, I think, Deputy Chief Constable from Lincolnshire yesterday, and we were discussing the link between organised crime, cross-border crime in rural communities, and he was seemed very keen to sort of explore that more in part of his role, which I think would be really interesting. And certainly when you talk to members of your team, John, they have said to us that they recognise that there are definite elements of organised criminality in part of what you do. The question is, how does that, I suppose, link in with your broader portfolio, Amanda, around serious and organised crime?
So we know that we've got mapped organised crime groups across our rural areas and impacting on our rural areas, and that can be to varying degrees. When we look at covert ways of gathering intelligence, we always look at the necessity and the proportionality. And for me, the absolute impact on our rural communities means that often the necessity is there and the proportionality is there because it has such a huge impact. So when we look at whether or not we can authorise and allocate resources in a covert way, actually we are making great strides here in North Yorkshire to really push the boundaries and not just use traditional methods of gathering intelligence. So we really are pushing the boundaries in all sorts of ways and techniques from a covert perspective, but also from an overt perspective with John's team and others to just really try and harvest all of that information. That means that we can really target these organised crime groups in a very different way. And there's been some successes that have been highlighted quite recently that whilst we haven't been really explicit in describing the fact that we've used covert techniques, I know that we have, and I know that I've seen some of those results out in the public domain.
So I suppose for your team, you know, are we confident that when they engage with a criminal in one way or another, that if there is a link or a suspected link with organised criminality, even if it's even if the particular offence that they are on with is relatively low level, that information is being captured as something that is linked to organised crime. So, because I'm trying to understand what the impact of organised crime is in the rural community on rural people, as opposed to whether or not, for example, covert assets could be deployed. It's trying to understand that impact in our communities of the sort of organised element of it.
The cumulative impact. So I think you probably respond really well to individual cases of theft of a quad or whatever it might be. It's whether across the whole of North Yorkshire is the impact of organised crime really well understood, or as understood as it can be.
So we're mapping the groups and we sort of know where they're operating, but do we really understand the level of sort of harm that they are inflicting on our rural areas?
I think the answer to that is no, and it's something that we've talked about, and clearly you've had some conversations with Craig too. I think there's more to do around understanding the impact. We've made great strides. We've looked at our victim impact statements in a different way. We always capture that in more detail when it's a series of offences, but actually there will be a different impact in our rural communities. For instance, theft of a quad, we know takes out somebody's livelihood and stops them working. Well, that's quite significant, and we do try and capture those things. But the larger look, we talked earlier about fly tipping. We know that on occasions that's linked to organised criminality as well. So we're alive to it. We're trying to do more. But could I absolutely say we completely understand the impact? I don't think we do. But that's part of the journey that we're on, to reach out to people to come and talk to us a lot more than perhaps what they've done in the past because of the way that we've been.
So one of the things that we've been trying to sort of pursue through the National Rural Crime Network is to try and perhaps look not just within North Yorkshire but more widely at this issue. You know, because there will be people travelling down from Cleveland or up from South Yorkshire or even further afield. So anecdotally, some of the evidence is that some of the fly tipping in Selby has come from Scotland, you know, and things like that. So it's trying to sort of understand those patterns and that I think links into the sort of demand work perhaps that Phil is doing in other ways.
I think the wider study across the nation would be really welcome, because we can't forget that we're the safest county in England. So when we start to look at the impact and the figures, sometimes they alone, they can hide the impact and mask the impact of what those individuals' crime have. So a bigger piece of work would help us, but we would absolutely try and take part in it if we could, because we want to understand what's happening in North Yorkshire.
It is on the NRCN work programme, it's just not top. The domestic abuse research was top, which we're progressing. So it was always second on the list, but whether this year or next, it'll move to the top once the domestic abuse research has been done.
I wonder whether then, it's obviously, Amanda, your call, but I wonder if this is something that Craig is interested in, that perhaps it's something he could work with the NRCN on looking at.
I'll speak to the chief outside of the meeting and we can see what we can do. Okay, we've reached out to various partners, and I think by being the national lead, that's put us at the forefront of having access to some really influential people, and that's definitely helped. You know, at the conference this weekend, we've been linked in with the Countryside Alliance, we've been linked in with the League Against Cruel Sports, with the RSPB, with the RSPCA. We've got really strong links now with NFU and NFU Mutual, so we've been able to use that as a platform really to reach out on a national level and local level with all of those key partners, and that's certainly helping us. We've run a number of campaigns such as Call It In. We were nationally nominated for an award for that, and we have a feedback procedure so that if callers contact the FCR that they do get that appropriate feedback, and John's just already touched on that.
Can I presume on working with partners, part of that, I think you said, was sort of understanding best practice. Going, John, to what you said, you've got part of two regional groups, the wildlife one and a more rural one. Is part of that about best practice? I'm trying to rationalise that with the National Rural Crime Network work, which is trying to be a hub of best practice. It's had a bit of a slow year, I have to say, so it's probably not seen as the go-to place at the moment. But what networks policing has to try and understand all those little snippets of best practice that might be really specific but really helpful.
So on the regional wildlife group, we have representatives from Natural England, from the Environment Agency, and then other particular ones which are specific to each region, which might be relevant, sort of smaller instances such as the Marine Maritime organisation. And then within the the regional rural crime ones, other agencies such as CPS are represented there, and we often invite other agencies in, or there might not be a standing member as such, but if they've got something relevant to say, perhaps there might be members of the GAIN network, such as National Food Crime Unit or someone of those likes, who we invite to speak just to try and increase that network and yes, like I say, share good practice.
Well, I know that we touched on the work that you were doing through the National Rural Crime Network is around domestic abuse, and I don't want to touch on that in too much detail because, of course, we do have thematics in relation to domestic abuse. Now, I think, and serious and organised crime similarly, I think I was alluding to that earlier in that we hold those thematics, and as a rural force, whenever we look at the way that we approach our victims and reports of crime, then of course we need to factor in that rurality. But I think it's just to reassure you there that we are looking at that. We are looking at you know, the amount of crimes per thousand population reported both in our rural areas and our urban areas, the access to services and all of those things that we completely appreciate is quite different in an isolated area to somewhere that's a lot more urban. And we've already talked about the serious and organised crime. We've touched on fly tipping, not traditionally a policing issue, but more and more so coming up through all the surveys and everything that we've been involved in. We're not shying away from that work. That's why we've made sure that if it's going to be a priority within the rural priorities, that there'll be a policing presence within that group from now on, and it will report back up to the Chief Constable as the national lead. So I think that's an important step forward. I've talked there about supporting victims and criminal justice. Again, we need to organise ourselves in a slightly different way. We know that we can do lots of things through social media and through the internet, but again, the connectivity isn't always great in rural areas, which makes people feel even more isolated. And I think it's safe to say lots more to do in that area.
On the criminal justice front, Amanda, I don't know if it was one of these meetings, but we've talked about sometimes the challenges which I think are slowly being overcome with magistrates and judges understanding and prosecutors really understanding rural crime, and what steps we're taking in North Yorkshire, especially now you've got a lead role to sort of try and develop that understanding in our criminal justice sector.
So this is something that we, as chair of the local criminal justice board, this is something that we've picked up at the LCJB, and I think there's a willingness from partners to have a look at this. So we need to take it back into that forum. Yeah.
I mean, just touching on wildlife crime, which is next on the list there. I've met with the Chief Crown Prosecutor in relation to our approach to wildlife crime, because we were out of sync with some of the other regions, and we've now got 2 dedicated CPS lawyers that will have specialist training to tackle wildlife crime, which means that when we take it through to the prosecution stage, we've got a much better chance of landing a prosecution than we have in the past. John and his team have worked with the CPS to look at victim impact statements, recognising what it really means to live in a rural community and be subject of that type of crime as well. So that there is lots and lots of work going on through the criminal justice arena.
And again, linking that with working with partners, I know, for example, there are all sorts of volunteers that patrol national parks and riverbanks and all sorts of things. Is it 101, or is there another way for them to try and get involved in the wildlife crime element of that they might come across, not part of their role as a volunteer necessarily, but they might come across it as part and parcel of the job?
If they're coming across a crime, then it's got to be 101. That's a filter for everybody. But we've reached out to various people, and the RSPB were telling me about I won't steal his thunder because he's going to do a press coverage on it, but he describes it as the best day of his career, of his 28-year career, where he had come across an incident, he had the team's number, he went direct to them, we deployed really quickly, and we've been able to detect and probably prevent much more wildlife crimes as a result of that phone call. It was a really despicable act. So there are, those links that we've got with our partners are much broader than just the 101, and they've always got access to the team. What we wouldn't want to do is encourage people to just use that as the only channel of communication for all the right reasons. They've got to come through the force control room.
People do go to organisations like the RSPCA though, don't they?
Absolutely,
Yeah.
and the RSPCA regularly work with our team. The bailiffs that you've just mentioned in relation to the Angling Trust, again, the National Wildlife Crime Unit have done the training for me in relation to that and rolled it out, and we've got all the local links there as well, so we're regularly doing operations with the Angling Trust. So those partnership working arrangements are becoming much more enhanced. Again, we've got work ongoing with the national parks in relation to their volunteer schemes. Now we can work much better with those teams of people as well. All isn't well with wildlife crime. I think we're doing a really, really great job. We are challenged by the environment, by the type of wildlife that comes to North Yorkshire, and actually I know that we're going to be flagged very soon in relation to raptor persecution, and the RSPB would certainly describe us as the worst in the country in relation to that.
They already are describing us as the worst in the country. I mean,
Yes.
I got a whole flurry of stuff on Twitter about it. I mean, there's all the sort of notorious stuff about the peregrines at Malham Cove and all that sort of stuff. I suppose, I mean, it is interesting. I mean, I had people coming into my surgeries about 4 very early days talking about the peregrines at Malham Cove and them and people feeling that it wasn't being taken seriously and all the rest of it. It has changed now, and now it has.
Yeah, and the RSPB would recognise that as well. In fact, at the conference at the weekend, Sergeant Kev Kelly from the team has just been awarded the National Wildlife Crime Enforcer of the Year award, which is a really prestigious award, and we're chuffed to bits. You can imagine that Kev is as well, but that's in recognition really of the team effort of just where we've taken things under John's direction. To move from A to B has been significant, but it's starting to make a difference.
Can I ask specifically on raptors then what the sort of action plan is to not be the worst place in the country if we can?
Well, I think at the moment, certainly the RSPB bird crime one which you're referring to and the government maps that will come out will show North Yorkshire in a poor light. Part of that is down to our geography and the natural habitat that exists out there. I'm sure the same report highlights North Yorkshire Police's response to it as being leading as well. So we're actually actively put up there on a pedestal to say our response to it has been excellent. I've written a problem-solving plan which focuses quite clearly on prevention as well. That's what we need to do. Enforcement is only one part of it. As I'd say, we only know about the tip of the iceberg there. We're going to utilise those maps which highlight hotspots and really go into those estates, landowners, people with shooting rights, gamekeepers, organisations, and focus quite heavily on prevention and what we can do to educate those people around raptor persecution and what will happen as a result if it's not adhered to.
So I'll just give a bit of positive feedback actually, because I was talking to some members of the shooting community recently, and they were saying voluntarily that they felt that behaviour was changing. in North Yorkshire, and that people were taking it a lot more seriously than they had done in the past. So I think the message is starting to sort of get through. So, you know, I know it's only anecdotal, but coming from those sort of directions, it's good.
It's certainly been seen, and it's come from a place such as Basque as well, the British Association of Shooting and Conservation. It's been highlighted by them in coverage that they've put out, press statements, so it really is showing that I think the message is getting there. We just need to keep working at it, really.
Not necessarily a fan of targets, but have you got any goals for what the outcome is if you want to reduce raptor persecution by a certain amount or anything like that?
That's a difficult goal to try and give. What we would say is we'd like none. What we'd also say is that we know that because of the natural habitat, it's going to become more difficult. I think we're steering the ship, changing the tanker around, so culturally it's becoming much more unacceptable. As people pick up the phone and give us a ring, they know that we're taking it more seriously, much more seriously, and we're deploying to it. We've upskilled our staff, we've bought extra equipment, we're working much more hand in hand with our partners. And so over time, we're actually are confident that things will start to change. But, you know, we'll always need to put in an immense amount of effort in North Yorkshire because of the beautiful place that is North Yorkshire. That takes me on to some success stories, actually. So some of the things that have been a success. In the first year that the team were launched, they arrested over 100 people. And that's a significant amount of money. They seized over 35 vehicles. In the second year, the numbers are still high. We're really looking at the problem-solving approach now and taking a longer-term view. As John's alluded to, we've got problem-solving plans that are written for rural crime, for poaching and for border vulnerabilities. We've got a number of operations running at the moment. Operation Sidekick is one of those, which is an intelligence-led approach to deployment of covert assets. We are looking at a number of organised criminal groups. It's not just about drugs, it's much wider than that, and it is things like we talked about theft of quad bikes. We understand that organised criminals will come across into our communities and commit serial crime. We've had a number of wildlife crime prosecutions, from birds of prey to poaching to badgers. We've rewritten the way that North Yorkshire Police deals with wildlife crime so that appropriate advice is sought at the initial investigation and the decision-making stages. Poaching, we're regularly getting fines now in the thousands, vehicle seizures, disqualifications, and we've given poaching packs out to everyone. The poaching packs that have been written by the team, we took them to the conference this weekend, and we had a queue from other forces just wanting to take them away as best practice as well, because it just takes people through from beginning to end what it is they need to do.
So I was talking to the MP who chairs the new rural crime APPG, and she was looking for somebody to go to the APPG on poaching. So she's working with Lincolnshire because she's a Lincolnshire MP and they've got an operation in Lincolnshire around poaching, but she didn't want it just to be limited to Lincolnshire, so I'm wondering whether we could maybe feed that back, and might be something we could pick up.
Yeah, certainly.
Yeah. The other thing, just talking of poaching, one of the other pieces of feedback that I've had is the difficulty of seizing dogs because there's nowhere to put them.
I'm looking at John to answer that question.
I mean, I'm linking that in also, though, John. I'm thinking about the, I don't know if it's still going, but the operation that we had where we worked with Lancashire around sheep theft, where we actually arranged with local landowners to have places where we could store sheep. Yeah. So I'm wondering if there's a similar thing that could happen with dogs.
That is still running, the sheep one, and then we do have a bit of a network of people dotted around the force area who will take them. I would say it's less frequent an issue than poaching and the potential seizure of dogs. I know we've gone through a process already with business admin support to try and identify kennels who will have them. Again, that's proved slightly difficult in identifying places. We are working towards it. It's not a barrier to it. If we need to seize dogs, we will seize them. I think there's
a perception, I think, that it is a barrier. So I don't know what you do about that, but there's certainly it's come back to me a number of times saying, oh, they've nowhere to put the dogs, therefore they don't deal with it. It's a perception.
Okay. it hasn't come to me as a specific problem. If we ever needed to, we have managed to seize dogs. It's something we'll look at. I will always review cases that are involved, either myself or one of our sergeants will review cases where dogs have been seized because of the additional cost associated with them. We'd always want it to be a case where we were able to achieve decent evidence and there'll be a likely prosecution, otherwise it will just be us that incurs that cost.
Sorry, one other thing, and I suppose it's linked in, I should have mentioned it, it's linked into the serious and organised crime, but just obviously there's the whole issue, it was when you mentioned the D word, drugs, the whole issue of county lines and how this impacts on rural communities as well.
County lines does impact on rural communities, it impacts on coastal towns, on rural communities, and I've actually been involved in an operation over the last few weeks which has been looking at just that. So I think that perception of rural communities being protected from crime isn't true. So yes, they are impacted on by county lines and drugs. The other thing that we should remember is that whilst I said they don't always have the broadband width and the connectivity of the internet, actually when our children were safe in their rooms on a night in the past in rural areas and the areas where they went out with friends, they were much safer. Now they are at risk in their bedroom, and we're seeing that from impacts such as CSE, etc. and trying to get those messages out in a different way is a piece of work that we're doing too.
So it'd be interesting. I think I'd like to come back to county lines in another sort of way, because I am concerned about that. We did look at it a while back when I was told that there wasn't a problem in North Yorkshire. I think that is certainly, I don't think I think there's probably been a lot of learning since then, and there is an issue around this, as there is in many of the parts of the country, and I suppose it goes back to your point, Amanda, that people living in rural areas might not necessarily think that this sort of thing happens in rural areas, but if you go into some of our sort of market towns and talk to, for example, through the police and crime plan research that we did, the issue of drugs came up as a concern a lot of times in rural areas, and I think there's a tendency sometimes just to think that it's an urban problem, and I suppose it's trying to find out where this slots in.
So, Commissioner, I can, within the performance packs, we've got the county lines updates in relation to some of the operations, so I can give you that element now. So, yes, you're right, in terms of Harrogate and the villages and areas around that, we've got Operation Cushion running in relation to out-of-force area drugs, teams coming in and supplying into those areas. In Richmond, it's Operation Westmoreland, running again, Market Town area, looking at drug supply coming in from across our county lines. Scarborough and Rydale area, it's Operation Variety, again, looking at predominantly the metropolitan organised crime groups coming from Manchester, London, Leeds and places, coming into our rural county areas, Scarborough as a town and Rydale areas as well. So there's specific operations set up for each of those within each of the commands that cover the rural towns as well. So we have those in place.
And I presume that links in with the CSE and trafficking element of it as well.
Yes, so there are, so on some of those there are separate operations running in relation, depending on the scale of the problem, or others it's a combined approach.
The other thing, this is more organised crime than rural, but a national report I read somewhere was that children in private education are being targeted more because there's essentially more means for them to be buying drugs and then selling them on, and then just making sure that, I don't know how many of those we've got in North Yorkshire, but that element's included as well.
Okay, the last point in relation to our success stories is we've also used antisocial behaviour legislation. We've got Section 34 dispersals and criminal behaviour orders in place as well, so we're not afraid to use legislation such as that. Can you just move the slide on for me? It's just not... Thank you. I'm nearly at the end. I wanted to touch now on learning points because I think it's important to try and have a look at that. I talked about the fact that we kicked off with a big event in Thirsk. I think it was in February, wasn't it, as we were starting. We've invited a reference group of people back into the organisation on at least 2 occasions now, where the Chief and I and John and the team have met with them just to ask, so how do you think we're doing? And we want to continue on with that piece of work because we don't think we've got all the answers, and we do want to keep going back to people to make sure that that they feel that we're delivering what we said that we would from the outset. Some of that learning then has been around rural policing should be business as usual for all, and I think that's what we touched upon earlier. Which call taker will you get when you ring in? Which officer will you get when you go? So we're trying to improve that now of it should never just be business as usual here in North Yorkshire, because we do think we need that bespoke service, but actually it's upskilling right across the organisation that we're now trying to do, and we certainly think there's a need for more communication between the Rural Task Force and other teams to try and enhance that service more. The use of volunteers, the early issue...
Can I just stick on that point, Amanda? Some of I think this is almost inevitable and not necessarily a bad thing, because it shows how active the Rural Task Force are, but sometimes some confusion from members of the public as to should they engage with the task force or their neighbourly policing team and what things on what, and should a rural watch be engaging with both, or sometimes that was a bit of confusion. And again, a perception, which I'm sure John will be able to answer, that the views of some Craven and Scarborough residents, or sort of the rural bits of Scarborough anyway, see less of the task force than the Hamilton and Richmondshire's of the world, who are more centrally based, and therefore they might have a bit more action just because of that, and they'll have people passing through. So I don't know if that's any myths you can bust, or if there's anything in any of that.
Can I just link something into that then? So we've also been doing in the OPCC a bit of, and there will be a proper report on it, some interviews with some of the volunteers, trying to sort of understand their sort of engagement with in the rural areas. And I do wonder, John, and I don't know whether this is true or not, but obviously you work really well with the volunteer groups, the rural watches and all of the rest of it, and they are not consistent across North Yorkshire. So you've got some really excellent ones that are very active, and then you've got some areas where we're a bit thin on the ground. And I do wonder whether sometimes the work that you do is linked to the development of the sort of volunteer infrastructure. I don't know.
No, certainly some of the work we have done has been on that, Commissioner. We're working towards making the volunteer groups, or if you would like to call them mobile rural watches, more consistent. We identified that quite early on, that there was a disparity between the two, so I've been working closely with Natasha Armand as volunteer coordinator for North Yorkshire Police to have one structure that would fit all. We've worked on the existing groups, and we're currently through a process of getting all to that consistent structure now, how they look, and then we'll look to map them and then see where our gaps are around significant areas, in particular, say, Craven, for example, and Scarborough, which you just probably mentioned there, at identifying some good volunteer groups within there that we can utilise.
And I do wonder whether that links in with your question, Will, which is around the activity of the Rural Task Force in those areas, because if you are working very closely with volunteer groups and there aren't any volunteer groups in an area, then whether or not there's a bit of a sort of chicken and egg situation there, if you see what I mean.
I do. I would argue against that. We have been quite active in Craven and in Scarborough, just in particular areas. We know of significant issues within Craven that we've had, especially with cross-border criminality. And again,
Tell me about it.
Again, with Scarborough's border with Cleveland on the Whitby side, I have officers based in Settle and I have officers based in Whitby. So I would like to think that we have been quite active in those two areas. Hopefully, we just maybe need to be seen to be active a bit more.
And I have to say that was definitely a bit of the feedback, and it links exactly into the volunteer network. And I said this to the members of the public I was speaking to who aren't part of a rural watch per se. There's almost a sort of informal one, but nothing formal, and therefore the engagement that when I've been out on Checkpoint, Operation Checkpoint, for example, where you're engaging with members of the public and the volunteers, they see it happening, and therefore they sort of they can see the benefits of it. Where it's sort of heard about and last week they did something, it's not quite the same, and there is a benefit to having that more formalised volunteer network because they're then part of it, and you might give them slightly more information because they've been vetted or whatever else. So I did sort of say to them, I know it was the only place I'd felt less confidence than everywhere else was the Whitby area of the patch. But that is where there is equally, as I understand it, less rural watches. So how linked that is, I don't know. But I was trying to encourage them that way.
It is interesting though, because they sort of, very often it depends on a really enthusiastic individual or few individuals in a particular area, and sometimes, you know, they you know, have been at it for years and think, gosh, well, I've had enough of this now, and you know, they hang up the boots, and then sometimes the sort of enthusiasm in an area for it goes away, and it's in you know, I don't think we've had a really active rural watch in Crane for quite a long time, despite lots of efforts that tried to sort of get one up and running.
And exactly that happened in this part of Whitby. I can't remember exactly which patch, where they got lots of people together who were very interested from all different sort of elements, and something happened with the meeting that couldn't go ahead, and everyone sort of fell out with each other and decided, well, we won't do that anymore, which was probably 2 or 3 years ago now. But that sort of that stays with people, doesn't it?
And you'll be pleased to know that we've covered off point 2, which says volunteers.
Can I just, on the local police, and one of the other things that has cropped up quite frequently, and obviously we've had a couple of recruitment sessions this year in particular, is the handover, because neighbourhood policing areas, obviously in rural areas, generally quite a bit larger, and so they're less likely to come across a local officer. And part of the feedback has been not knowing who a new officer is, or feeling that there's just been a gap, and having had quite a lot of engagement previously with a local neighbourhood officer or PCSO, then suddenly not having that, and just feeling like there's suddenly a void. Is there a particular way that that's being addressed, maybe specifically in rural areas? I don't know.
So yeah, well, not necessarily just specifically in rural areas, but I think the issue for us is a success point in terms of actually our PCSOs being successful through the recruitment campaign, the fact that we're actually recruiting quite regularly officers into the force. So I think in terms of that, the great thing about it is we're keeping the skill set and the individual within our county and still serving our communities. They're just doing it in a different way. The element for us, I suppose, then is that we don't know how many PCSOs to be able to recruit the gaps until we know who's been successful through the process. So, again, it comes back to the Commission's point around there's a little bit of chicken and egg, and how do you do that? I think for us then, what we need to probably do, I think, is look at through our commands and our neighbourhood teams of how we better manage the communication around that, and actually give the reassurance to the communities that yes, there might be a gap whilst we're training somebody up, but actually there is a plan to replace those individuals. Now, it's great that those individuals have served the communities, really valued by the communities, and then moved on to become police officers or other roles for us. But actually, I think that's something I'll take up with the commanders around that communication.
But also sometimes there isn't a plan to replace them. So Massam is a good example of that. The police officer there has retired. And actually, when I went to go and see the community in Massam and explain to them that they only had 31 crimes in a year, they sort of saw the fact that perhaps the PCSO is a good solution. So it's that explanation to people, isn't it, that people need, so that they understand why those decisions are being made. Rather than, nobody explaining it to them and them just seeing it as a loss. Yeah,
and I'll make sure that we pick the ideal people to explain that to the communities are the neighbourhood inspectors. So I think we need to just make sure that we are talking to the communities around that. And actually, there is a neighbourhood presence there and a resource there. It's what that resource looks like is determined on the demand that we're facing.
And they're very complimentary about the PCSO in that area. So I don't want to undermine their work.
Can I just go back to ask John how the task force does work with local policing in that respect? Because I know for the public watching, how the task force is structured. There's a officer and a PCSO based in each district, I think, but then obviously come together often to do joint operations. But somewhere like Massam, where they might have lost an officer, I don't know how much they'd see of a task force officer, for example, and they do very different things. I know that, but how you work together to understand those changes, because that might mean they do something slightly different in Harrogate Borough than they would have done otherwise.
Well, I'd like to think we've formed quite close links with our neighbourhood policing teams across districts. Now, clearly, use the example of Harrogate there, or we have one officer per district that might incorporate 4 or 5 neighbourhood policing teams, of which several are rural. So it's quite key to us. They hold a lot of the information that we need to know. So we hold frequent discussions with our MPT colleagues to make sure that we're trying to enhance some of the work they do rather than duplicate or replicate it, because there is a bit of a crossover, and only through that good communication with each other can we ensure that we are actually providing an enhanced service.
Okay, next on the list of learning points is wildlife crime, and we've talked about this at length around the fact that we are a high risk area, some of the work that we've done with the RSPB and others. We've got direct access to the Raptor Persecution Group nationally, because that feeds into the National Wildlife Crime Unit that I line manage. We've got some things wrong. When we've got them wrong, I think we had perhaps underestimated just how emotive this area of business is and was. So it has resulted at times in a number of complaints and lots of activity on social media. The learning point from that, I think, was to be really upfront, honest and transparent and say, we think we might have got this wrong, we're going to take a look, and then reporting back through the same channels to say, actually, we could have done this a little bit better. That didn't come naturally to all, and we had to talk that through, but that was going to be the approach that certainly I would take on behalf of everybody else. But the feedback that we've got as a result of taking that stance has been phenomenal, and people, I think, have got a lot more trust in us now, that we are prepared to take a look at ourselves when we don't always get it quite right. The next thing was around our communities. We are still, or had been, getting feedback in relation to people being able to report in problems through the 101 service, and we know that we've done a tremendous amount of work in that area and continue to do so. And then also making sure that the Rural Task Force feedback to callers, so if they ring up about a suspicious incident, that we ring them back to let them know exactly what we've done about it. So the poaching example is one of many where we really need to be feeding back to people to explain exactly what action that we've taken.
Can I ask that one? Is there a specific protocol in place or something whereby that's a given, that feedback? Because in talking to, especially actually Rural Watch members as well, they quite often, without us asking, brought up that feedback wasn't necessarily happening consistently. So I know it's not, it's a time thing to a large extent, but is there some kind of reassurance we can give people there?
I think it's a fair point, and I don't think we're probably there as yet to get that real consistent approach to it. It's something that we identified fairly early on, because we're asking people to call in incidents or suspicious incidents, and then if they don't hear anything from it, it might reduce their likelihood to call in again. So we've tried to address that as best we can. We thoroughly search our incidents daily, including suspect incidents that are reported in our area. PCSOs and PCs are tasked to go back to those callers. Can I say it happens every time? I can't say it for 100%, but we do have a system in place to try and make sure we get each and every one of them.
Because it spreads around rural communities like wildfire, that's the issue. So if somebody's, if somebody feels that nothing has happened, quote unquote, then everybody in that local area will be talking about the fact that nothing happened.
And that's often where Rural Watches are really helpful, because you might tell a member who will then tell the others, but when it's less formalised than that, that might not happen quite so easily.
I wonder whether, it's one of the big things that could, I think, reassure people quite a lot is that feedback. It is, and also it's linked in also to the use of community messenger as well, isn't it? And developing that as well.
I mean, just to give a specific example on feedback, we had a caller who called in about a suspect vehicle, assumed it to be poaching, didn't get stopped at that time despite a response. But as a result of that, we were able to put an ANPR marker on that vehicle, was stopped 2 weeks later in a different area. Actually, the occupants were then reported for summons for poaching, and then we were able to feed back to that first caller on the value that her call has actually given. And I just thought it was a really good example of actually how it can work, and then she'll be more likely to hopefully call again next time.
It's also the proactive bit, so this is again something you can't manage or measure, but when I was out with the task force, Kev spotted something that looked very ordinary to me, but looked out of place to him. And it was a trailer, and he called the owner, because he checked with the police, and it was a very long way from home, effectively, the trailer. So he called the owner and said, I'm a bit worried, the trailer's very far from where it should be. Is it all right? It's not been taken or anything. And it hadn't been, and it was all above board. But Kev was probably quiet for a minute while he was being told how nice it was to get a call and how thankful the person was about checking. And said, now I'll probably now report stuff more. I don't know if he quite said it in those terms, but he'll be more likely to engage with police now because they're taking the time to do something like that.
Mm. And that's exactly the bit that we were trying to do in the beginning when we looked at the survey. So that's really helpful. Last on the list of our learning points is, and we've touched on this, about rural wellbeing and the vulnerability. So we don't quite understand yet what the impact is of domestic abuse and other types of crimes on just how then our communities feel as a result of that criminality, and we think there is much more to do in relation to that.
Just on that note, I went in Julie's place to a DEFRA meeting last week, which was basically about isolation and well-being and fear of crime and things like that. And whilst they'll be doing a summary, I think, of what everybody said, and there's a really good range of people there, I will make sure I share that because it will be interesting. It was partly about resilience and other things. Yeah. Can I ask one other question? Julie, forgive me, you've got an interest in this, but I'm maybe raising it on your mouth. I think so does a Rural Watch leader in somewhere, Thirsk, I think. One of the things the BHS have raised with me before is the possibility of volunteers of some kind or either on horseback or while they're on horseback doing some sort of policing type voluntary work of some kind. And I know that's not happened today, it does happen elsewhere, and if there were any plans or not in that regard.
So Hertfordshire does it, I think, and Lincolnshire has Sussex, yeah, so there are places. I think there were concerns that there might be sort of people cantering off into the distance and all of the rest of it. But I mean, I ride horses, so I know when you're on the back of a horse, firstly, you go very slowly through the countryside and you go around the same places all of the time and you know what's what in those communities. So if there's something out of the ordinary, you spot it and you know it. And it's maybe thinking about, and you also tall, high, so you can see over the hedgerows and all of that sort of stuff. So it's tapping into those eyes and ears in the community more than, you know, perhaps it being, I think, you know what I mean, that's I think a possibility.
Just to touch on that, I think we've got some quite good links now into the equine community through especially one of our team members who is that way focused as well, is Hannah. She has excellent links in there. Whether there needs to be something more formalised as a result, I think hopefully we get our message out there in terms of this is what we need to do, this is what you need to tell us about, etc. Does it need to be a more formalised one? We haven't explored that as yet.
I think you'd have a real willing set of people who would be, I mean, the amount of social media activity that goes on between those communities and the way. So for example, a friend of mine who happens to live in West Yorkshire, she had her Land Rover Discovery stolen. It had all of her riding kit in the back, and she photographed it and shared it all over social media. Her Land Rover was found parked up in an estate in Wakefield, and because of that, it was called back to her, and she got both the car back and all of her gear back, and that was through the sort of riding club network and all of the rest of it. And there's a real strong network there that I think that we could be tapping into that we're not necessarily tapping into.
And the interesting thing that I've just thought about there is Operation Spartan, which Dave Barth heads up, has targeted people on horseback to bring in with antisocial behaviour use of the road. So if you link in with him, you might be able to join up that piece of work, please.
Zoe, because she rides as well, so she'd be the one to link in. Mm-hmm. But I just think that there's a real willing group of people there. Just
to confirm, we do have that link in with Op Spartan already, and Hannah McPeak and Zoe Billings have done events around use of the road, not just focused on those communities, but also on their responsibilities as well as riders.
Future plans, the first thing I'm going to touch on is technology, and clearly I need to up my game in relation to the use of this mouse today, because I've certainly struggled with some technology. Obviously, we're rolling out mobile working. That's going to be crucial for our officers and staff working in our rural areas, because it's going to stop that elastic band effect of them having to come back into the police station all of the time and make them truly mobile out in our communities. MODS, which is our vehicle equipment, that means that we can have sight of not only where the vehicle is at that time, but also where it's been, I think will really help us with reassuring our rural communities, because we're going to be able to look back over at the number of patrol hours that have taken place in specific hotspots or rural villages. We're often out in the dark, especially this time of year, and people will feel that they haven't seen a police presence when in actual fact we may have been there. So I do think that too will be really helpful. Drones is on the agenda, used elsewhere around the country, and North Yorkshire Police have been able to purchase a drone, and we're working through at the moment a member of staff going through that pilot's licence so that we can more effectively use it. I think that's going to be crucial. If you think about some of the open land searches that we need to do for things like missing people, apart from all the other crimes and incidents that we can look at as well, I think that's going to be really, really helpful to allow us to cover a big space.
2 weeks ago, I went to visit the cave rescue people in Settle. I've been to visit quite a few of them now. I think they just do such a fantastic job, and it's all volunteers, and so if they're listening, thank you. But they were feeling, I think, that they hadn't quite got the same overt support from NYP as perhaps they'd had in the past, particularly from members of the Chief Officer team, and we did have some people who were very engaged with them a while ago, and I just feel as if perhaps we need to be a little bit more overt in our support of the rescue organisations, because they contribute so much to what we do. And we did used to have an awards ceremony for them, and I don't think we've had one for a bit, and I just wonder whether, and we used to donate through the community fund to them, and the return on investment that we get from them is tremendous. I just think maybe if I could feed that back.
I'll pick that up, Commissioner. The lead this year has been a superintendent who's within my command. It may be that we just need to look at how the Chief Officer engagement needs to be with that. And I do know that superintendent has been a silver commander on a Kingfisher for a number of months, and it might be that there's just been a little bit of a gap there in relation to engagement. So I can have a look at that, and I can reassure you that there is that continued commitment around finances. They do an absolutely phenomenal job, and I'll make sure that I can personally give that message to them.
Yeah, that would be really good. And I mean, they talked about a police officer, not a superintendent, that they had liaison with, and I think they felt that it had gone down the priority list, and I just think that we just need to bring it back up again.
I'll take a look at that.
Can I ask something on drones, Amanda?
Yes.
That is something that always comes up when I speak to rural people, particularly on poaching, and there'll be lots of farmers and other residents who know, or what they think would be a good launching off point, because they know roughly where things will happen and this is a good place to get all of them, etc. What are the plans to sort of use that for more specific, you mentioned missing people, but clearly there's lots of other sort of open countryside issues that they might be really useful for. And one sounds like not very many for...
John and I saw a really good presentation at the weekend from the Police Service of Northern Ireland, where they'd used a drone to tackle some wildlife crime offences, particularly with raptors, and it had a huge impact. They felt it was probably the first time it had been used in that way, but then we do know that the RSPB have been using it too. So we definitely have got some plans in place in relation to that.
It reminds me of balloons being shot down in the past, but if anybody remembers that, no, they don't, do they? That shows my age, doesn't it, anyway?
The other thing is either to knock on the head. I presume you've considered it, and it's something that's sort of, you know, gone through a risk matrix or whatever, but there's always seems to be lots of people willing to use their drone skills to help the police. But they're never sure who to ask or what they're allowed to do in that respect.
Yeah, we're not reaching out for volunteers in relation to drones at the moment. There is some complicated legislation around. People can access it online if they need to, and we're making sure that we fulfil our legal requirements before we deploy.
Sorry, just more broadly, this has got nothing to do with rural crime, but I mean, I've noticed on the places that I go up on the moors and stuff like that, there are more and more people, instead of flying kites, they're flying drones, and I just wonder how much work is being done to ensure that the public actually understand what their responsibilities are.
We've put some communications out just quite recently as a result of an operation I've been running where there was some drone activity. We made sure that we put that communication out, and we have made steps in relation to prosecuting some people as well. So we are trying to communicate that out.
I just wonder whether, I mean, I know it's such an old-fashioned idea and it's probably completely nuts, but there are spots where people go to fly these things, and whether you could put notices up. I mean, simple stuff, you know, where they go regularly to fly this stuff.
We're not getting significant reports in, are we, to say where they are. If we come across that, we can try and have a look, but we are putting things out in the press and social media, etc. as well, to be honest.
Horse riders notice these things.
Okay, thank you. Perhaps, Commissioner, if you'd like to afterwards tell me some areas where some notices might need to go, we can have a look at that. Future plans, we've talked about organised crime groups. We think that there is more to do in relation to that, more mapping and more understanding of what the impact is. Something about regional working, so we've had some real decent successes in relation to Checkpoint and some other operations that we've ran. We think that those regional groups that we're now tied into right across the northeast of England should really build on that work, to be honest. And I think it's really encouraging that we've got that 7-force network and not just JAF or the north-northeast, that actually we've done it across 7 forces. We're linked in with the ROCUs in relation to that too. We want to build more in relation to the work that we're doing with partners and our volunteers. So we want to, we talked earlier about volunteers being our advocates. We think that there is still more to do in relation to that. And the other thing that we're doing is continual professional development. So myself and the Chief are actually looking at, although we talk about a National Wildlife Crime course, it isn't accredited through the college. So we want to try and make sure that those people who are going through what looks like a national course are actually going to be accredited in the future. And then there's lots more opportunities that we're reaching out to for learning and training courses. BASC have made some offers for us, the RSPB, RSPCA, the Environment Agency and others are actually putting on bespoke training for us now, which is helping with our CPD.
Can I just say, I don't know if it's the type of person who wants to become a wildlife officer that sort of lead to the outcome, but I almost always get told good things about wildlife officers proactively. People say, oh, well, blah, blah, blah is really good, and they're the wildlife, you know. So there's always really good feedback about the
passion of the team and motivation of the team. And then I look to the National Wildlife Crime Unit, having just held interviews for the new Chief Inspector in that post, and then looking more widely at the Wildlife Enforcers Conference at the weekend. People are really, really passionate about what they do. So we're not tinkering around the edges, because that's wrong, but we're trying to professionalise the training. We're trying to bring in the best approach for tackling these things. We're trying to link in with the partners, but actually the job's done already, because the people that we're working with are so passionate and motivated that it actually makes our job easier, if I'm honest. Just a couple of things in relation to wider plans from a national perspective. We're currently working on the wildlife crime and the rural affairs strategies, and we're hoping to launch those in the spring of 2018. We've just appointed the new Chief Inspector as the outgoing Chief Inspector. Martin has just retired, and I was able to say my goodbyes to him yesterday. We've started to develop our engagement events for next year and understand what we need to focus on. And Will, I know that you're attending some of those development meetings. The draft rural affairs strategy is already out for consultation with key partners across England and Wales. It's identified a number of priorities, such as farm machinery, plant and vehicle theft, livestock offences, fuel theft, equine crime and fly tipping, so it is right across the spectrum there.
I don't know if it's something Amanda or John can talk about, but I know Alex Butterfield tried to get an NRCN engagement, we just couldn't attend, but various lobbying activity in Westminster about amending the livestock, whatever the act is that it covers livestock, to to widen it to sort of more modern
Yes.
farming. And I didn't know if there'd been progress on that.
Yes, there has. I haven't brought an update to today's meeting, so I'll make sure that Alex updates you. But that's just one of the examples of how we're operating on that national stage. So thank you for raising that. The priority delivery groups for rural crime will be very similar to how we've set up the ones for the wildlife crime, because we've taken the learning from that, and they'll be across those areas that we've just talked about. The regional structures actually mirror the regional organised crime units, so we should have access then when we come across organised criminality within that area of work to more assets than what we've had in the past. DCC Craig Naylor, as we've said, has just been appointed as the Silver Lead for Rural Affairs, so that's a work in progress too. We've got 2 interns with us in North Yorkshire Police this year. They're from York University. They're dedicated to the development of this portfolio, and they're working with us in relation to developing that strategy, doing that national benchmarking exercise where we can have a look at what's happening elsewhere, and they're also helping Alex with that livestock worrying work that's now got an awful lot of support in relation to that.
Commander, just quickly, just on the your operational priorities, I'm wondering whether, if we're thinking about the NRCN best practice stuff, whether actually what we should start to do is to seek case studies around those priorities, and that might allow us to structure the content on that website.
That would be hugely helpful.
Yeah,
hugely helpful.
Okay, and that gives us quite a clear sort of way of trying to sort of engage with people. One of the things that I would say might come top of that list would be defender theft, because that is a real national problem, and whether or not there's any way in which we can start to think about gathering case studies around that, because obviously it's a problem here, but it's a problem all over the place.
Steve Thomas might be able to help you with that, John, because he sits on the regional group in relation to that, so we might be able to put something together.
Yeah, that'd be really good,
Okay, that brings the presentation to a conclusion, Commissioner. I think in summary, my personal thanks to John and the team, because they were given a really big ask in a short space of time to put that team together and reach out to partners. I think there's more to do, but I think that team is exactly where I would have wanted them to be when they set out. But I think, it's onwards and upwards with more to do.
Okay.
Just say the same thing. Clearly, you've made a difference. The feedback is almost absolutely positive. But same to the local neighbour policing teams who are out there doing a very similar type of job, who are, covering big open spaces with not always that many of them to go around. So lots of people working very hard in the rural areas.
Yes, thank you. And having met many members of the team, they are so enthusiastic. It is fantastic to see. So thank you. And now I've got one question, Amanda, and you might not like this. So the funding for the rural team is 3 years, is that right?
We've built it into our people plan.
Right, okay, because there seems to be some rumours around that it's only for 3 years.
I've certainly never said that. We've built it into the people plan. The only thing that we are piloting is the extra sergeant, which when we reviewed it at our management team just last week, we can see the benefits already, and there's no plans at this moment in time to reduce down that post either. That was the only temporary post. All of the others are permanent.
Right, okay. Well, then I think we should feed that back into the channels where those concerns have come from, because people are saying, this is great, we don't want to lose it. So, okay.
I think it's a sort of thing that the Chief and I were scratching our heads thinking, why have we not done this sooner? It was exactly what we needed to do. So there's certainly no plans from us to not have that team.
All right, great. Thank you. Okay, Operation Kingfisher. You're doing a lot of talking, Amanda. Thank you, John.
Well done.
And pass on our thanks to the team.
Certainly will. Thank you.
Thank you.
Commissioner, this is just a short update in relation to Operation Kingfisher. This is just a short update in relation to Operation Kingfisher. Clearly, it's an ongoing operation that we have planned for about 3 months or so. The first slide is the same as last month's, which is just setting out some of our objectives which members of the public are able to see there. So we've got it on two fronts really. We're trying to deal with facilitating peaceful protest at Kirkby Misperton, but of course also balancing our business as usual and making sure that we're giving that same quality of service that our communities should and do expect from us. There are several stages to Operation Kingfisher. We've completed the first two stages now and we are at the third stage. There are a number of permits that need to be signed off at Kirkby Misperton for the next phase of work to commence, and we're actually just waiting for that to go ahead. We continue on with our plans, we continue on with the resources that we have, and we continue to assess on both a daily and a weekly basis as to what resources we currently need. I've taken the opportunity of holding a mid-term debrief just to look at any lessons learned, and that was a really positive experience just last week. We're reaching out still to other forces to look at their lessons learned, and we're also reaching out now to forces who are quite interested in the work that we've been doing. What we are doing on a daily basis at the moment is being able to redeploy any officers. So if we have planned in a set number of officers that we thought that we required that day, we're reviewing it the evening before and actually first thing on the morning and releasing as many officers as possible. And on most occasions at the moment, it's the majority of those officers back out into the North Yorkshire Police area across our communities to do various pieces of work that's impacting in a positive way on communities. So we're not sitting on our laurels on days when activity is less and the protest activity has been less over the last 2 weeks, and we're making sure that we do redeploy. On other days the threat and risk increases and we're making sure that we've got resources there if we need it too.
Can I ask, there's probably a question more for you, Phil, as local policing, but given, certainly in the last couple of weeks, the redeployment of people, is that going some way to help local policing cope with some of the losses they've had in going to support the Kirkby Misperton operation?
So can I just add so where the stresses and strains have been felt is not the neighbourhood teams, but it's the response officers predominantly. So just want to make that clear. And also I just wanted to, who's responsible for issuing the permits?
I would say, Commissioner, that's government departments.
Which government department?
I haven't got that detail to hand. I can tell you exactly which ones they are, but I haven't got that detail to hand.
Can you just let me have them?
Yes.
Yeah, thank you.
Okay, so just in terms of the local policing, there's a couple of things where we're seeing some positive impacts. So the planning phase in relation to the dates when we originally started planning for the operation were within the 3-month time frame. So within police regulations, we were constrained with how we could plan those resources going forward. We're now into the phase where we're tipping over until we've had 3 months notice. So actually there's more structure available to us to deliver business as usual. Those resources that Amanda's alluded to coming back from Kingfisher again, there's a meeting takes place every day with the duty superintendent, and they are being proactively placed in the areas of need for community reassurance and to support response policing in some of those pressured areas. And again, talking through that, the local commands and chief inspectors on a weekly basis are assessing where they've got the gaps, and we're using resources from other areas of policing such as proactive policing and other departments to start to fill those gaps. So that, again, we're still maintaining that level of service, but the pressure on our response teams is reducing. Okay.
Outcomes that we have here have already been published. The additional costs and outcomes that we have on this slide have already been published in the public domain. I guess that's just a matter of timing sometimes as to where public accountability meeting is held. We tend to be able to finalise our accounts somewhere around about the 10th of the month, depending on when the 10th of the month falls, and we attempt to publish those figures together shortly after that time. So what we have up here is up to the 31st of August and then September and October. September was the first go live month, so I always anticipated that it would be higher than what had gone previously. And then we started mid-month in September, so I always anticipated that the costs within October would be slightly higher. There were a small number of really challenging days within October where we utilised mutual aid, so those costs for October were higher, and we anticipated that they would be. There were only a small, I think 4 days, something like that, when we utilised mutual aid. We haven't, thankfully, had to do that yet in November, and as we've talked about, we've been able to manage things in a slightly different way for now. There will be some trip over as to when those overtime claims go in, whether or not they get in before the deadline, or whether some of them straddle over into the period of November, but I'm anticipating that costs will be in line with what I'm seeing on the ground for the month of November when it comes to publishing mid-December. There are a number of arrests and disposals out there. September we made 26 arrests, and in October we made 40 arrests. The total number of arrests are around about 70 at the moment, and of course we monitor that daily. We monitor those charged, cautioned and no further action, and we're also monitoring what's going to be happening through the courts, and we're looking all the time at any learning that takes place. Commissioner, we've got a full engagement strategy in place in relation to this, so we are constantly listening to what various groups of protesters are telling us, what the company is telling us, most importantly what the community is telling us, because we know that when we move on there'll be the footprint of the local people there that we want to continue to work with. So we do have a full engagement strategy in place, and we're monitoring that all the time through both gold and silver. That concludes my update in relation to Kirby Misperton.
Can I just ask, Amanda, something I mentioned right at the beginning on the back of the actions, I'm presuming, but totally happy to be wrong, and if it's something that's not be able to be published for an operational reason, but we've answered a question on de-arrests so far, and I just wonder if we could keep that, if we're able to, and update these figures or publish it next time around, just if we're answered it anyway, we might as well.
It raised a really valid question, and we've been able to go and take a look at what we think the figure is, and it is very low. It also raises a gap, not just locally, but actually across the UK, that it isn't something that we normally measure and collate. And actually, when you think about use of force, it would be a really interesting thing to do, but there isn't that natural way of collecting that data. So although I do have it and we are looking at it, I am not 100% confident that we've captured everything, although we've gone back to each and every bronze commander to check that we have actually collated what it is we need to. But it's something that it's scratching your head again, why aren't we doing that? But it's something that traditionally just has never been captured and measured.
Just one other thing, obviously some of this will result in higher than average numbers of people going to custody.
Yes.
How is that working?
So we've got a number of commanders that take part in the Gold Group, one of which is Criminal Justice and the Custody Chief Inspector. I monitor that on a weekly basis. They've got access to Silver and to Gold on a daily basis should they need it, should demand increase. Actually, for those number of prisoners over that period of time, our custody facilities, for instance, at Harrogate are running at about 24% capacity. So for that number of prisoners over that period of time across York, Scarborough and Harrogate, we've been able to deal with that no problem, to be honest.
One last question, only because it was raised at the Police and Crime Panel, and actually I think a few members of the public have asked. What's in place in terms of wellbeing for the officers, given it's getting towards winter now and very, very cold the last couple of days, but it's quite a long-term operation and there's lots of sort of nuances to it that you wouldn't otherwise be having to manage in a normal...
We've put wellbeing right at the top of the Gold agenda, and I monitor that weekly. So we've got the Federation and Unison have access to Gold. We've got a dedicated wellbeing plan. We have a dedicated wellbeing officer, and we've got a dedicated welfare officer for each of those officers. They also clearly have access to all of the bronze commanders on a daily basis because they are tight-knit teams. We're monitoring all of that. We're making sure that they've got hot food, that they've got hot drinks, that they've got access to toilet facilities. We've made sure that chief officers are regularly going out to those briefings, and I know, Commissioner, you're intending to make one of those briefings just so that we can listen to them to make sure that what we are being told is actually how they're feeling and that people do feel able to speak out and that they do feel supported. But I'm pleased to report that actually we're getting a number of volunteers coming forward to continually come back and work on the operation. because it is improving and enhancing their skills. They've been trained to do this deployment, and actually some of them are enjoying just the difference that it brings, to be quite honest, and being able to put those skills into place. But we are constantly monitoring the well-being. I've personally looked at some body-worn video footage, and some of the officers actually have had to put up with an awful lot of comments, quite negative comments over a period of time, and we're making sure that we're debriefing those officers with a process called TRIM, just to check on their mental well-being and psychological well-being alongside their physical well-being as well.
Thank you very much. Has anybody else got any other questions on that? Okay, so performance, outcome and updates.
Okay, Commissioner, so that's hand over to myself. So using one of your riding analogies, I'll canter through this one, given the time.
Well, you're all right, because there's not... There's, yeah, well, that's in here, so I'm wondering whether we can cover 101 off.
All right, okay, I've got some separate slides on...
Yeah, I know it's a separate pack, but yeah.
I'll try and cover everything. So in relation to where we are performance crime-wise, then it's similar sort of arena to the last presentation. So we're about just under 6% rise in crime overall, again against a national rise of between 10 to 13% in relation to crime. North Yorkshire Police, again, North Yorkshire as an area maintains the lowest crime rate per 1,000 head of population in England. Although we've got some long-standing crime trends of note that we've discussed before, we've also seen a rise for us in criminal damage and shoplifting. However, when you look across our most similar force groups, it's still showing us ranking either first or second within those crime types. Killed and seriously injured, casualties on our roads, long-term trend remains down, which is really positive. I'll come on to the call handling statistics in a little while. But in terms of satisfaction and public confidence-wise, we're currently lucky to enjoy the highest levels of public confidence of any force in the country at this moment in time. In relation to specific crime types, again, rather than going through each individual one, we have seen high levels of increases in burglary in the Selby area during October and early November. That's resulted in the implementation of Operation Dusk, which is focused on that particular crime spike. And we've seen several arrests being made within the area, and identification of some OCGs travelling in from West Yorkshire and South Yorkshire into the Selby area to commit those burglaries again. So there's lots of activity taking place with regards to that, and we've had a number of arrests for individuals that have committed several of those burglaries.
Okay, sorry, if I can ask a question. It seems odd for arson and criminal damage to have gone up in Harrogate and Selby in particular. I don't know if you've got any information on that. It just seemed like an odd one.
Yeah, so again, part of the, in relation to Harrogate issues for us is there's a rise in antisocial behaviour as well. So we're seeing a rise in criminal damage linked to the antisocial behaviour, and Operation Sift, and I'll come on to some other operations that are running in that area, so Operation Conjure is running as well with regards to that. So the rise in criminal damage in Harrogate area is linked to our antisocial behaviour. The rise in, again, in Selby area as well, we were seeing high volumes of vehicle damages, etc., that we saw spikes of literally individuals going around whole car parks. And again, for us, it's just being over this financial year, it's really difficult to recover that position. So antisocial behaviour overall, the force has seen a reduction of just under 4% decrease on last year for antisocial behaviour. Again, looking at our demand that we're requiring our staff to attend, public safety and welfare incidents, we're seeing a long-term upward trend. Again, so we're doing some work around identifying where that demand is around mental health work, where that might be around concerns for safety, missing from home. So again, we've got specific groups working on how to identify how we prevent and intervene in relation to that, to try and provide a better service to the public in conjunction with our partners, but trying to reduce the demand on us in those areas. Some of the key operations I've already Technology is not a strong point. So some of the operations I've mentioned in relation to the cross-border criminality and the county lines, but again, in addition to those, and Opdusk and Opcondia that I've mentioned, we've got Operation Variety that's running, which is targeting some OCGs. We've also got Operation Casbia that's running around York as well for significant groups causing antisocial behaviour, using mopeds and motorcycles. So again, that's particularly on the west side of York. There's focus around that area and prioritising.
I think that in particular will be well received, Phil, from the calls we've had in the office.
Yeah, so there's a number of operations running there, and the slides up there for the public to see, but again, for me, to run through the next slide relates to the Rural Crime Task Force, which I'm hopeful that you've had the update in relation to that.
We don't need to do that, yeah.
So I'll move on to, so again, for some of our notable investigations, just want to note for this period, which Operation Clue received a guilty plea to manslaughter, and we're just awaiting the sentencing in relation to that.
But no, she's been sentenced.
Oh, that's right, sorry, slides out of date then.
Yeah.
So victim-based crime, again, you can see where we're seeing the rises. Richmondshire for us, again, has seen a rise, what we're seeing in particular around antisocial behaviour and burglaries. For Richmondshire area, again, Inspector G has got specific operations running in relation to that. We've got some proactive policing resources in there to support him deliver against that operation as well.
So
sorry.
Go on. I mean, some of these are the biggest percentage rises we've seen in a long time. And
it's the same areas over and over again. I don't think there's necessarily time to go through it now. And they're not new. We've talked about Harrogate and Selby issues in most of these meetings. But if at some point we maybe get an update on why those three areas seem to be always red and the numbers seem to be getting worse, I think. I haven't got all the other slides.
Well, Selby's isn't. Selby's was at one stage at 40%. That was for the spikes that I had outlined to you as well. We have seen some recent ones in relation to burglaries. They were recent for October, November. Richmondshire area is a new rise in us, and particularly around burglaries is what the key issues in Richmondshire for us there. So for the amount of crime that takes place, that's a significant concern for us, is a rise in burglary. So Operation Copycat's been set up to deal with that.
So I think it would be fair to say when we had Steve Thomas come in and do the burglary deep dive, there were a number of things that he raised that gave us a cause for concern. And I just think that perhaps, can we pick that up? We don't have time to go through that now, but if we could pick that up on one of our regular meetings, Phil,
sure.
That would be...
Do it tomorrow.
Yeah, that'd be really good.
Another reason why that presentation, not to come back to this meeting, because there's other things to do, but where we wanted a particular update on that presentation.
Yeah.
See you tomorrow, Commissioner.
Yeah.
So, okay, again, the previous, sorry, I've skipped 2 slides again, haven't I think. So again, this is just showing again the rises in antisocial behaviour for us. Whilst overall the force it's reduced, again, we're seeing some key rises in Richmondshire area, some rises in Selby. It's the same areas again, so I think in terms of that, we'll give you that briefing update outside of the meeting, if that's okay.
Yeah, thank you.
Okay, so in terms of that's the operational performance presentation completed. So we're on to the people element of that again, so I'll just quickly give an update in relation to those. So of police officer wise, again, 28 student officers commenced in October. Further intake of 28 transferees scheduled for January of next year, with a further 28 student officers for March 2018. So again, that programme is designed to take us up towards the 1,400 officer figure.
Are the transferees specific to a particular requirement? Are they detectives?
Yes, there will be a focus on some of those for detective recruitment, yes. So again, we've just run both an internal and an external transferee campaign for detectives. We've been quite successful in recruiting a number of those. So, but again, we're starting to look at some of the specialised departments that we've set up through the vulnerability investment.
Okay, so that links back to the money conversation that we had earlier on.
Yes.
And I just wonder whether that is factored in. Obviously, we took transferees in this year,
Yes.
and that's had a knock-on effect in terms of the money, whether or not whether we've calculated the cost of these new transferees into the budget?
Well, these are currently built into the
They
budget
are.
as a transferee campaign. Obviously,
Right.
it depends on...
But we
yeah,
underestimated it, didn't we?
Yeah, I mean, I need to pick that up with Jane afterwards and just see whether or not there's any lessons to be learned from the previous campaign,
Yeah.
because again, it depends upon what level of service an individual has served as to who comes in, as to what pension and level of pay scale that they are when they enter the force, because I think in terms of the budget position, it will be based on student officer rising through the pay
Well,
scale.
that's that. So can we?
Transfer is partly meaningless because it depends on their rank and length of service and all sorts of things.
Well, the rank will be a constable rank.
Right.
It's just, it depends on what pay scale they're sitting at within the constable pay scale and between the 10 scales.
So can we just, bearing in mind the conversation we had earlier, can we go back to Jane and just make sure that, firstly, that we can afford all of that, and secondly, that it is properly accounted for?
Yeah, I'll do that.
Yeah. Okay.
Okay, just in terms of PCSO campaigns, again, there's the next intake for PCSOs is planned for January 18. Again, to take us up towards the targeted PCSOs of 214. Again, the fluctuation for us is difficult to manage because that depends on how successful individuals are when they look to enter the police officer campaign. So overall, staff-wise, again, I think the increase that we're seeing predominantly in relation to the staff side is the increase in staffing within the force control rooms. There's been an additional 15 staff in October with regards to the force control room staffing. So volunteers-wise, again, at the moment, for October, we're at 252. Volunteers. There is a breakdown on the slides, should anybody want to have a look at that.
So one of the things that I think is slightly opaque is because you've put cadets in with volunteers. So I think we should split that out, because then that gives us a better idea of the difference between the two.
Okay, yeah, we can take that out for the next one.
Yeah, that'd be good.
Okay.
Because we can't really see the true level of volunteers, the fluctuation.
Yeah, okay. We can
Yeah,
break that
particularly if we've got new cadet schemes coming on.
out. Yeah. Okay, so just for information, within that 250, 41 are cadets.
Right, okay. Yeah, all right, thank you.
So moving on to the mental health slide, regards to use of street triage teams. And again, I think you can see for September, for us, again, there was a use of 68 occasions where we've used the street triage teams.
Can I say thank you for including the under-18 figures this time, because they'd been missed off, I think, for oversight. I'm sure it is the case, and helpfully Bill Scott did some extra work on this for us over the last couple of weeks, but I know, for example, one under-18's been detained, I think, 5 or 6 times over the last couple of years, and it's just making sure those repeat detentions are sort of, I'm sure they're all flagged, but the repeat ones are flagged even more than normal.
Yeah, they are. The referrals will be made into CAMS and the like in relation to that. So yes, they'll be in place. And again, those are reviewed by supervision to ensure that those things are taking place.
So it's good news that we've got nobody in custody in August and September. That's really good. Through the Crisis Care Concordat, we've got a whole piece of work around this. And Jenny is looking at the moment at the street triage and the FCR triage and looking at the utilisation of that. So there's a broader piece of work going on around that.
Yeah, and then obviously the new legislation is due to come into force next month as well.
Yeah, which is somewhat concerning.
Yeah.
Yeah. Not that the legislation is concerning, but the response.
Okay, and then on to the Force Control Commissioner in relation to that update. So for the first slide for us, again, we're still seeing a rise in calls. However, so we're essentially what we're seeing is an extra month's worth of calls have been required to answer on previous years. So in October, the speed to answer, given the plans and improvements that we've put in place, we're showing an improvement. So again, September, was an improvement on August, October was an improvement on September. So again, we're seeing month-on-month improvements at this moment in time, which is positive news.
It's quite misleading, this, though.
Is that, how much of that, it's the same question applies to the 101 number actually, and I've no doubt at all how much work is going on and how much effort people are putting in and all the different pieces of work that are still ongoing. How much is related to call volume and how much is related to all the bits of work going on. So the August to October call volumes come down quite a lot. It seems relatively mirrored by the average time to answer. So whilst it's great, we're down to under 10 seconds now for 909, how much is that just related to the number of calls that we're answering?
I don't know.
No, I don't expect to know, but I suppose, yeah, we're raising it to sort of take up elsewhere, I suppose.
Yeah. Yeah, and I just think in terms of that as well, it's looking at the attendance. So the attendance for immediate grade incidents and for our priority grade incidents. So when you start to look at that, so that's from the point the call is answered in the force control room to the point the officer arrives at the scene of the incident. Again, so for us in immediate grade incidents, for us in rural areas, it's 15 minutes, and in urban areas, it's 11 minutes. So again, I think when you look at previous old policing process targets, we're still able to get within the bounds of those or close to those, given that we've been running Operation Kingfisher for the recent couple of months as well. I think that's a positive figure to show in relation to that.
Phil, can I just want to clarify something in this report? So in the third bullet point down, it says the demand appears to have dropped in September and October, but this is due to the hold for an operation line, which has diverted demand away from inquirer. So actually, the number of calls hasn't fallen. It's just they're being dealt with in a different way. Is that correct? So it's a bit misleading the way that this is.
The call figures that you've got are calls that are physically answered by our through the normal routes. So they choose options 1 through to.
So this was raised in another forum.
Yeah.
So there are not 2,588 less calls coming into the control room. They're just being dealt with in a different way.
I don't think the operator equates to all of those calls. I don't think so. Worth picking up, because you're right, there will be some of that.
But that's what it says here. It says it appears to have dropped in September and October, but this is due to the hold for operator line.
So in relation to, I can find the figures for the operator. So in September, the operator line answered 8,500 calls.
So this is what I'm saying. So can we just clarify these numbers and just make sure that what we've got is total call volume as opposed to calls answered volume, if you see what I mean?
Yeah.
I suppose there's also the challenge of in July and August when there wasn't, and even September when there wasn't an operator service.
Well, that's what I'm saying. So in July there wasn't an operator service, and there's 2,280 more calls.
But there wasn't one in August either.
Well, so I think there was part way through.
Yes,
there was part way
there
through.
was.
There was.
It started in, I can't remember the date, but it did start in.
There was. So we just need to just check that.
Okay, I'll get the clarification on that for next
I
time.
believe this call volume is just 101 numbers.
It's the control room, isn't it, Rob? Yeah.
Let's just clarify.
I'll have a look at
Yeah. Because in the 101 report that we published, there was the same issue as well. So we just need to just.
Lots of confusions in there.
Yeah, there was.
Because the sort of point remains, because operator is one of the areas that's helping reduce demand by dealing with things a different way, but there's still calls that come to the control room that hopefully are being answered quicker because of things like administration functions being taken out.
No, I understand.
But it's helpful to know which of those is having the biggest impacts, isn't it?
Yeah. Okay, we can pick that up and make sure of that.
Okay, thanks.
Okay, so in terms of 101 performance, again, demand on inquirer calls, which is the option 1, May through to August 2017 is similar to 2016, but it's up on the 2015 figures. So generally demand was peaking in August, and it just seems to have dropped off again, what we're saying in terms of September and October, but this is due to the hold for operators. So this is the figures that you're talking about, Commissioner.
Yeah.
We need to give you that better idea in terms of what that looks like.
Yeah.
So in 2017, the average speed to answer in July was 250 seconds. Abandonment rate was 22%. October performance is similar to September, which were improvements on August, which in turn showed improvements on the July figure. So again, the plans that we put in place to start to improve on performance, we're starting to see that sustained benefit coming through now and improvements in month on month. So again, in addition to the operator line, we've had the queue buster and the crime and occurrence management changes, which I'll explain as well. So, following the feedback from public, one of the measures we put in place was the hold for operator, which was introduced. Again, as I've outlined, in September there were 8,500 calls answered by this operator line, which equates to about 283 calls a day. In October we had 9,665 calls answered, which was 311.
People catching on to it.
Either that, yes. But I mean, I think in terms of that, when you start to look at the breakdown, it's almost equal third splits that we're looking at in relation to calls which resulted in an incident, people requesting another department, or quick queries that actually could be dealt with by the operation.
But that's good, isn't it?
The call handler, yes.
Because that's exactly why it's there.
Yes, absolutely. So, and on a weekend, actually, what we're seeing is a rise in those quick queries as well, which to us is probably an indicator of those ones that probably would have gone to partnership agencies that are coming into us at the times when they're closed. So, but as a result, the positive elements of that, there's a reduction in our abandonment rates on the automated switchboard. So we've gone from, on average, 64 calls being abandoned on a daily basis to 34 calls being abandoned. So in terms of measure 2, the queue buster, again, this was looking at bringing in an option for a ringback facility. So again, in October, it's averaged about 140 calls a day using this service, and it's taken on average about just over 10 minutes for the individual to receive a call back from our service.
So that's getting longer.
Yeah, it is in terms of that, but I suppose as that becomes more popular and as you see an increase in operator calls, it's just balancing that out really in terms of that.
Yeah, because I do think it is important that it needs to be relatively quick.
Yeah, so I suppose it depends on if we're working with the public as far as find out actually what's the time that they feel is realistic for a call back in relation to it.
Yeah.
And I do think it's a really good option. The challenge is it only works. It's only an option when the waiting time is quite long, and therefore I imagine an impact is the average time to be called back might be higher than we'd like, because clearly they're busy anyway, which is why people are waiting longer.
Yeah, but when it first launched, it was a lot less. Yeah.
I think the thing to note there is that in the first month that it was used, we published the amount of time, so it was used less, so the time to call back was lower. The time actually since then has been relatively consistent at around 10 minutes, so that's levelled off, if you see what I mean. So it's staying rather stable at the moment.
They're still testing
Yeah, I think to note on the presentation what we've had is anecdotal feedback from customers is that it's positive. I think probably if we could firm that up to be more empirical based evidence that actually the public are happy to wait that 10 minutes for the call back, then actually that rather than put maybe a pressure on us to reduce that time if it's not required by the public.
Could they ask a question when they call them back? Say, this is a new service, can you just give us, A, B or C, do you like it, do you not like it, do you know what I mean?
I suppose that's where the anecdotal feedback's coming from in terms of that.
We sort of formalise it a little bit,
as part of the performance framework is there's ways to try and formalise the feedback from places like control room. Lots of control rooms now in other sectors will have a little menu at the end where you can give your feedback. So we should do that more formally for all sorts of reasons, not just callback.
So just in terms of some of the recruitment and training elements, so 50 staff have been recruited since August 2016, 24 communications staff, call handlers and 26 dispatch staff to fill our vacancies. So of this, 38 are now fully trained and accredited with an additional 12 dispatchers in tutorship phase. So as of the 10th of this month, there'll be 12 dispatchers and 4 comm staff will have finished their tutorship and they'll be fully accredited. So that'll be then take us those further 12 up to full strength. So if a further 11 communication staff and 5 dispatchers have begun their classroom training, which started on the 6th of November, so they're going through that process at the moment. And there are further training courses planned for April, August and October 2018 and January 2019. So again, there's a new training hub that's been set up in Harrogate Police Station, and again that's proving to be a successful location to train those staff. It eliminates the need for staff to be distracted for training new colleagues and means that business as usual and answering calls in the force control room and dispatching can continue without having to support a training hub in the same environment. So group measure, goal measure 3, so crime recording and occurrence management. This is where we've looked to reduce the administration that our call handlers are undertaking. So a pilot began on 5th September. There's some positive results being taken from that, but we've extended it for a further 3 months to see if we can embed those results. So with regards to that, there's been a reduction in time taken to input information in October by 15% compared to the 2017 average that we had prior to the pilot. So we think, again, whilst it's a little bit early to say whether or not that's fully embedded as a result of what we've done, we've extended the pilot to make sure that we can assess that properly.
Do you know, Phil, and this will be really difficult, it might be a nexus job and just get on with improving the service in the first instance, but trying to understand the impact these various bits have had in their own right. So taken together, they're clearly making a difference, but it might be we want to keep some going because they're really good value for money or something else, and it's just knowing the difference each change is made.
Yeah, well, excuse me. There was a full nexus review done to identify the opportunity to do this. So I think that we've got a business baseline to go back to, and I think when we've done the further 3-month pilot, we can assess it against that baseline.
Okay. All right. I'm just conscious of time, Phil. Now.
Okay. All right. Yeah. No problem. I can. There's not I think a lot more to add in relation to that we haven't already discussed, I think, Commissioner. So I think the only last thing for me to add in relation to that is prior to putting these plans in place, we were on the Home Office list for forces that had failed to answer 999 calls within 2 minutes on 50 occasions within a month. Last month we weren't on that list due to the improvements.
Very good.
Okay.
Thank you. And it's interesting because the bit of press work that has gone on around the inappropriate calls to 101, I think has captured the public's imagination, I should say. So it's been quite interesting. Okay. Thank you very much. So, next month we have...
Nothing.
It's
Christmas and attendance was limited, so we've rolled it over to January, which is the Offender Management Unit, which covers IOM and the MAPA, effectively. After that is local policing and then digital, I think.
Just for the public's awareness, we will still be publishing the normal performance data as usual on our website, so that will all be available for public consumption. Okay, great. Any questions, Simon?
We have 3.
3? Yeah. Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's the first one. Can we get next? Okay. And the next one. Okay, all right. So, Amanda, do you want to take the ones that are in your portfolio? If there's anything that we can't answer straight away, we can publish it on the website afterwards.
Commissioner, in response to...
You need your...
In response to the first question, clearly it's an ongoing operation. Clearly I'm balancing the right to peaceful protest with all of the other rights involved and enshrined in the law too. So I am taking that broad look at that rather than being able to answer that unspecific example. I can reassure you that we are doing that.
Okay, thank you.
If I could just take a look at the second one again and just quickly read it if that's okay. Commissioner, we've got 2 pieces of work ongoing. One clearly is when hunts are in operation, if we have any reports of illegal behaviour, then we would of course respond to that. Having met with the League of Cruel Sports, actually they raised a really valid point with me, which is if we are seen to be active in the prevention of crime, then people will be less likely to protest against what they may perceive as someone breaking the law. So we've also got some work ongoing in relation to preventative work as well through the task force. So it's 2 strands of work that we've got ongoing.
Thank you.
Yeah, so Commissioner, I think we have trained out the coercive and controlling behaviour in relation to domestic violence legislation. I don't have specific figures, so I think we'll have to come back in relation to that one.
Okay,
Yeah.
that's no problem.
It might be part of the domestic abuse update we had recently at this meeting, some of that information. So it might be actually relatively readily available, but either way we'll publish the information as soon as we can. But it might have been included in the last update.
Okay, that's it. Thank you very much. So there's the only thing that we need to do is action data from that last question. Yeah. Okay, great. Thank you very much. Have we anything else? Nope. So the next meeting is in January. And is this the last time we're going to be here in York? Right, okay, because I was going to say thank you. So if it were, but we're not yet. Okay, all right. We're still here. All right, thank you very much.